We have a very wonderful panel lined up for you, but I'm going to invite Anesta Weeks to join the panel. This is going to be very interactive. You'll be welcome. And Courtenay, by the way, said he'll answer any questions put to him. Is that what you said to me? Yes, he's very happy to answer any questions put to him, but that is later. Q&A is later. So for now, I would like to welcome our panel members. May I please introduce Sailesh first, who is chairing this panel session. I've spoken a bit about Sailesh earlier on, but may I just say a little bit more? Sailesh is a barrister at 18 Red Lion Court and a specialist serious crime, human rights and environmental law lawyer. He read law at Manchester University, graduation in 1984. He was called to the Bar Lincoln's Inn in 1986. He was instrumental in the Law Society Diversity and Inclusion Charter, which I've mentioned earlier on. He's now one of the Law Society flagship initiatives, which BLD is proud to support. He's a former chair of the Society of Asian Lawyers, SAL, and in fact is one of the founding members back in 1990. But that goes to show how old Sailesh is, isn't it? About the same age. Sailesh was also the founding member of the Bar Human Rights Committee back in 1991, and is his first vice chair. He was named by SAL as Criminal Lawyer of the Year in 2009. Chambers and partners describe him as a leader in his field, having led in some of the most complex and serious cases over the last decade. Sailesh has been named by the Asia Media Group as one of the top 10 Asian lawyers in the country. Sailesh, please do introduce members of the panel.
Thank you. This is the fun part of the evening. Courtenay's inspiring words ended with the call for justice, both internationally and nationally. And I can say that I did my own part this afternoon. I was in the International Court at Snaresbrook this afternoon, and I am defending two people, and the defense is that some will-clamping thugs were terrorizing a local Bengali community. And after a number of hours of cross-examination, I ended with a crescendo to this thug Will Clamper with the words, "You were out to terrorize this community, were you not?" To which he plaintively replied, "But I was only seeking justice." And there was a quiet voice at the back of the court, we think the usher, who said, "But you're at Snaresbrook Crown Court." I'm privileged to be amongst the panellists and with Courtenay. Can I introduce you to the panellists tonight? Paul Bugingo, who's to my far left, is a partner and chairman of the Africa practice at the international firm that seems to change its name regularly. It's now called SNR Denton, where he formulates and implements Denton's strategy for Africa, including managing the network of associated offices in 12 African countries, including Tanzania, where I was born. So I've offered to carry Paul's bags for his next international trip. He specializes in the energy sector, advising on power projects in Africa, including South Africa, Botswana, Uganda, Sudan, and Kenya. He's currently part of Denton's team advising the government of South Africa on 2 power projects, as well as the government of Southern Sudan on 4 power projects. On oil and gas energy, Paul is part of the Denton's team advising a major Russian oil company on investments in several countries in the sub-Saharan capital. Please will you welcome Paul. Thomas Laryea, to my right, is Ghanaian-born, was educated in England and in the US. Thomas's doctoral thesis is on international civil procedure. As a result, he will be shunned by every criminal barrister for being too bright in this room. He's also most recently Assistant General Counsel at the IMF. Prior to joining the IMF's legal department in September 2000, Thomas was in private practice with Sullivan and Cromwell in New York and in London, focusing on international litigation and antitrust matters. Thomas has also taught European Union law at the University of London, the School of Oriental and African Studies. It's a subject that I got a third class in, if only you'd been teaching me. Thomas's work at the IMF has included advice on the IMF's legal relations with member countries, capital markets, legal reform, and debt restructuring at the policy and individual country levels. Please welcome Thomas. And Anesta Weeks QC. Anesta Weeks QC is a member of the crime team at 23 Essex Street Chambers. I know, Anesta, you've been stuck in a conference this evening, and so we're very glad that you made it. She specialises in criminal law and is head of the education and training team at 23 Essex Street Chambers. She was counsel to the Stephen Lawrence inquiry and to the Broadwater Farm inquiry into the death of P.C. Blakelock. Anesta was called to the bar in Gray's Inn in 1981 and took silk in 1999. And the following year was appointed a recorder of the Crown Court. In 2002, Anesta became an accredited mediator. In 2003, was appointed a bencher of Gray's Inn. In 2008, Anesta was appointed by the Solicitors Regulatory Authority, the SRA, as independent chair of a working party set up to investigate the increasing numbers of disciplinary proceedings against ethnic minority solicitors. I was privileged to be in that grouping, and Anesta kept me completely in order, but in the most gracious way possible. On the international front, Anesta is a specialist trainer in advocacy skills and was a member of a team of lawyers sponsored by the UK government to train South African lawyers and judges. Since 2001, she's been chair of the British Caribbean Jurist Group and is a member of the Bar Council's International Relations Committee. She has extensive international pro bono work in the Caribbean, particularly Montserrat, St. Kitts, Barbados, Bahamas, and Antigua. In one case, she successfully applied for a stay of execution for a man facing the death sentence and commuting the sentence to one of life imprisonment before the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. Please welcome. As Debo said earlier, that the theme tonight for the questions and answers session is the international arena and the part that we can play as lawyers and the part that we have played as lawyers on the international arena. And to test the waters, as I often do, I thought I'd discuss this with my son to find out from him what he thought I should say tonight. And he looked very, very disgusted by the thought that I should say anything decent about lawyers. You'll have guessed that, having been brought up in the Mehta household, he thinks lawyers are not very good people. So I thought I would tell him a little bit about the history. So I started off with Cicero and how the first famous lawyer taught others about advocacy. I worked my way up to Abraham Lincoln and talked to him about what Lincoln did for America. And I then mentioned Gandhi and Jinnah in passing, founders of nation, Barack Obama, and for the final trump card, I said Nelson Mandela was a lawyer. And he listened politely to my little history lesson and nodded. And he said, "Dad, I can beat your argument with 4 words. Margaret Thatcher was the first 2 words that he said. And he said, the last prime minister of this country, Falklands and Iraq." And I'm afraid that he probably trumped my argument with Thatcher and Blair. And so what I'm hoping is that we can have an uplifting debate today to try to focus on what benefits we as lawyers can bring to the international stage, particularly given the wealth of talent that we have amongst the panelists tonight. I'm going to ask you to participate in this. I want some questions from the audience, but they mustn't be bland. They've got to be searching. And if you don't mind, I'm going to start with one just to get the ball rolling for the panel. Well, we know that Barack Obama is a lawyer, and we know the height that he has achieved. We also know the media attacking him constantly in America. What I want to know from the panelists is that the height that we can achieve, and are we actually going to achieve those sorts of heights as international lawyers within the BME community? Can I ask Paul first, please.
As long as I don't get the next first question. Give me time to think about it. I'd probably be certainly one of those who would not actually want to achieve the height of Barack Obama for one reason, and that is it exposes you immediately to a lot of pressure. And as we all know from previous American presidents, when you reach there, you have 8 years, if you're lucky, and then you're down. I find that at times the position that we as ethnic minority lawyers need to be in is in a position of influencing. And I think there are a number of people around him, some from ethnic minorities, and it's a pity we saw one recently step down, I think last week, in Rahm Emanuel, to just, the position of influencing policy around, of, as we know, the kind of lobbying that goes on, the kind of international mediation that goes on. I find that actually, the height we need to get is in the position of influencing. So I would probably be the first to avoid, if I suddenly saw I got the senior partnership of Denton or SNR Denton, I'd probably turn it down. Because I think being able to tackle the sort of the influencing factors is actually a greater role for us to play.
Thank you. Anesta, are there enough BME lawyers at a senior level internationally?
Internationally, I don't think there are sufficient lawyers. And I think the time is absolutely ripe at the moment if any of you happen to be interested in corruption. That is the area you want to practice, you want a high profile, learn about corruption. Because there are victims all over the world. And a great deal of victims are in Africa and Asia. I'm not interested in the politics of whose corruption it is, whether it's us in the West lording it over the corruption from the East. Let us not forget the victims of corruption. Hugely important. So I think we should think of our profile in that area. Of course, you can become a president of a country, and Barack Obama is just the most amazing event since the release of Nelson Mandela and since he stopped the bloodbath in South Africa. But I'm not particularly interested in politics. I'm interested in victims. So some of you may want to be politicians. I think that's fantastic. And I think you must become the senior partner of your firm so I can get some work from you. So I think we should think carefully. If law is your thing, I think there are lots of lawyers in the UK who haven't got enough work. Get on a plane and move international law, because at the moment it is totally ineffective for victims of corruption.
Paul, you've worked at the IMF. Firstly, can I have a loan? Secondly, are there enough people at that level?
Thank you, Sailesh. And my first time speaking, I want to thank Debo and the sponsors for inviting me to come all the way from Washington, and to Courtenay Griffiths for his brilliant address. Addressing your question in two respects, I'm a resident of Washington, D.C., and frankly, I find very depressing the political scene there. Barack Obama presidency was a great achievement for us all, I would say. But you see now a very strident minority who would rather have a 10-year recession than have a black man return to the White House. And it is depressing to witness. On the broader question about the role of BME lawyers on the international scene, I think we have tremendous comparative advantage that we have failed to recognize and to leverage. Everyone here has training in English law, but you also have something else. You have a connection to another legal system, to another culture, to another history. And that is extremely powerful. In my own work at the IMF, I find that the diverse lawyers, the diverse economists tend to be the best because that they understand more than one system. So I would strongly encourage you all to just to think about your roots and think about your history and think about how you can be established in that and to leverage that when you think about your career projection. On the international scene, as I say, I think the diverse lawyers have a tremendous advantage that we need to start leveraging more.
Just before I throw it open to the floor, Courtenay, any words about the International Court and our representation there?
Well, I'd just like to say shortly this, that I have never had any political ambitions for the simple reason that as a politician you have to make too many compromises. And there's certain principles which I have which I'm not prepared to compromise for political office. It's not something I aspire to. And I much prefer to be the perennial activist, you know, nibbling away at the ankles of the powers that be. But the short answer to the question you pose is that there are not enough non-white, black lawyers operating at the international level. And given that, you know, we're in these surroundings, can I just give some practical information? In order to sign up for the ICC as an advocate, you just go on their website and sign up either for the defense or the prosecution. You will require a CV, a notice of good character from the police. You will need a copy of your practicing certificate, whether you're a barrister or solicitor. There's a whole tick list of things that you've got to have in place. It takes quite a while, but it's worth it at the end of the day, because the bottom line is, when an individual is arrested, they're shown that list, and they can then select from that list who they want to represent them. And guys, let's be frank about it. If you've been plucked out of the DRC and taken to the Hague, and this list gets shoved in front of you, which name are you likely to pick off first? One that you recognize. So, you know, let's get real here, all right? It's the same with the special tribunal for the Lebanon. Again, you can register online to become counsel in that court. So please go out there, and even if you're not interested immediately, just, you know, go on the website and see what's available. And the other thing you need to bear in mind is this. The ICC, like so many other United Nations bureaucracies, because that's what it is, offers a number of paid internships. And so you can go over there and practice in the court for 6 months. And, you know, most of you are young enough to be able to do that without it causing you severe financial hardship. And it's worthwhile doing that just to get a flavor of the ICC, what life is like living in The Hague, and, you know, noting the fact that it's only 40 minutes away on a flight, on a plane from Schiphol. Okay, so go out there and go for it.
All right, I'm going to ask for some questions from the floor. Michelle, I think your hand went up.
Can you just wait for me to bring this?
Oh, okay.
Start talking. So that everyone can hear you. I know you. Is it Michelle?
All right, okay. Thanks for my hand being raised. This looks like the Soviet Union, all put together. But no, I think it's an interesting concept, our participation in international arenas. The question I would like to ask the panel is this. In participating in international panels, and we've heard Courtenay about, for example, the imbalance. So you have, on the one hand, large number of African defendants who are gracing the ICC, but, for example, not a single Israeli general has appeared, despite the obvious horrors that we have seen. So the question that I ask, by participating in these international fora, are we thereby somehow giving legitimacy to what you say, and what I agree with you, is effectively a white man's charter to look good, but effectively we do not, at this stage, have not brought to trial or sought to bring to trial anybody except African generals and so on? That's the question I would like to ask.
So to participate or to not?
Michelle, I think the starting point as a point of principle has to be this. we need to recognize that international criminal justice is an evolving system. It's just at the start of the road at present. That's principle number one. Principle number two is this. We have to recognize that many African leaders have committed the most heinous crimes against their own people. You only have to go back to Bokassa, you go back to Verwood, because it's not just black leaders who have a monopoly on that kind of obnoxious behavior. And so, echoing to an extent what Anesta says, I think it's important that victims of such atrocities do have a voice. And I think through our participation, we can bring about what is and must be the ultimate objective, that we shame, embarrass, bring about the kind of change which in time might see an Israeli general being put on trial. At present, that is completely unlikely. But I think it's only through struggle to that we'll get to that position of equality which we're all yearning for.
Linda Dobbs here. Whilst I can see the virtue of what you've been saying about getting out on the international forum and arena, and I agree with Courtenay that the standards are very varied, does it not follow that accompanying that there's a responsibility to assist the lawyers from the countries involved to empower themselves, to have the skills, and also to be able to have the courage to be independent and to be able to do what we take for granted, or what I used to take for granted as a lawyer, being able to represent people fearlessly without concern about what might happen to us personally?
Okay, can I just invite Anesta, firstly, to deal with that? I know Anesta sits on the Bar Council's International Relations Committee. Is that a fair point, Anesta?
Thank you, Sailesh. It is, and it's actually a hugely important point. For those of you who don't know Linda, she's going to hate me for doing this, okay? But she's our first female High Court judge. One of the reasons why I and many others are prepared to do stuff for no pay, although recently I've been paid fantastically well by the Bermuda government for a Privy Council case that I'm doing at the moment. So I'm off the pro bono list. I'm now earning lots of money. But the reason why I'm prepared to go to other jurisdictions, because people who have no access to justice because there isn't a lawyer competent to represent them, and they happen to be in a country which has a dictator, they have no access to justice. Now, Courtenay's right, we do still have this great reputation of being the best lawyers in the world, and the English Privy Council are the best judges in the world, and believe you me, they are. Bingham, who died only recently, was one of the best judges that I have ever appeared in front of the Privy Council. So we, that is you and I, should sign up to travel, and most of the time, in fact, every time I travel, it's paid for. It's my time that isn't paid for. But what you leave in the jurisdiction that you go to is that you meet people that think, wow, you are a QC in England? So you get the wow factor, and then after the wow factor, it's really hard work. But you leave those lawyers with a sense of the standards that are necessary if you look after the rights and interests of other people. And there is a coming together of the black lawyers from the UK, the black lawyers from the Caribbean, of which I met 8 islands, Africa, India. We have an extensive system now of the teaching of advocacy to other jurisdictions, because again, it's all about victims. So Linda's absolutely right. That's one of the first things we need to begin with. You need to have lawyers who are frightened to keep clients' money for longer than they should. Lawyers who are frightened that if they don't put the right question, they might come before the Bar Council. We have the strictest rules, I think, in the world, because I've been to other jurisdictions, and what they can do, I can't do. So we've got to transfer that expertise so that black people over there are just as well looked after as the black people that Sailesh and I and Courtenay look after here.
Can I just add something to what Anesta said? This is Justice Dobbs is the highest ranking ethnic minority judge in this country. Just to add to that, just to... he's in the legal history part of black letter law.
I think a quick word from Courtenay.
Linda, just taking up on your point, I think the first point that we need to recognize is this. By the mere fact that you as a black person are there performing, that fact in itself has an impact. Yeah. Let me just give you an example. The very first time I went to Sierra Leone, as a result of the Charles Taylor case, the Special Court for Sierra Leone were running these outreach projects where they take film footage of the trial out into the rural areas in Sierra Leone and show it to people. And they would ask lawyers to go along and talk to them and explain you're wrong. So I attended a number of those events. And initially when I went out there, this was way back in 2007, the reaction was, how can you be representing this man? He's guilty. Look at all the atrocities he committed in our country. By the second time I went back, by which time they'd seen how I was operating in court with the rest of my team, there was this acknowledgement that, Mr. Griffiths, we like the job you do. We still don't like your client. And so gradually, the very fact of your presence and what you're doing does have that impact. But in addition, we have attempted to recruit as many interns as we can from Africa. And I make a point of putting on advocacy training classes for them, because I do agree that we do have a duty and responsibility, given what we're exposed to in this legal environment, to impart as much of that knowledge to other less advantaged places around the world, which is why Anesta and I will be off to South Africa in January.
Yes.
To run an advocacy course for a week, because I do agree it is a vital part of the job that we have to do. You know, it can't be just about self making money. One of the beauties of the British Bar is the fact that giving of your free time is expected, and everybody understands it's part of your duty once you reach a certain position of responsibility in this job. And I think we have to constantly remind ourselves of that duty, that we have to give as well as take as members of this profession.
I have a question here.
Good. Person at the back.
Thank you. We've been asked to be frank. It's easy for me. My name is Ivor Frank. I want to say, first of all, congratulations to Debo for putting together such a constellation of stars of the legal profession on our panel this evening, particularly to Courtenay for a fabulous, fabulous talk. And I want to, if I may be so bold, adopt the plea that he made for the contribution from black and ethnic minority lawyers on the international scene. He and I are, he won't mind saying so, roughly the same age. I remember when I was called to the bar in 1979, and I was told after my pupillage I wouldn't be given a pupillage because they already had one black member of Chambers. I decided to get on the Freddie Laker SkyTrain and go to Washington, D.C., where I studied for an international law course at Georgetown U, and I worked with a very famous firm called Sidley and Austin. That course stood me in good stead, although I wasn't practicing in international law, because some years later, I was approached on behalf of an indigenous group of American Indians who had desperate problems in finding a lawyer to represent them. I spent about 15 years working on their behalf pro bono, and eventually in 2007, we managed to get the United Nations to adopt the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. So whenever you hear the Australian Prime Minister stand up and apologise to the Aborigines, or you see the American President invite the Indians to the White House, or you hear the Canadians apologising for raping the land up in North Saskatchewan, you realise that this is the product of an international tribunal process that has been set up as a result of the effort. And it's quite amazing to me, when I was doing that work, there was scarcely any lawyers from the United Kingdom or in any other ethnic minority. And in fact, when I went to the United Nations, I was astonished to find people approaching my group saying, we will help you out if you'll lend us your lawyer. So there is amazing requirement for this. I absolutely echo what Courtenay and others have had to say about this. And it is certainly worthwhile. And I congratulate you for inspiring us to feel that we should do more. Thank you.
I think we've got probably only about 5 or 10 minutes left.
Yeah, we just need questions. Can we have questions directed to Paul or Thomas?
Yeah.
My name's Dan Scatola. I'm a legal headhunter. So you know, don't get upset with that. But I want to offer you some empirical data, really. I've been running my own firm for 3 years, and I met Debo because in all that time I meet 100 lawyers plus a month. I only operate the CUN, so partners, senior partners. 100, over 100 a month. And do you know how many I met that were black or ethnic minority in London, in this country, in that 3 years? Less than 0.5%. Less than 0.5% of the people I've ever met doing this job, the people earning the most money, the people in the best positions, are black or ethnic minority lawyers. There is a huge they're being disenfranchised. So getting to the international stage, the question is, you're talking about, are there enough on the international stage? There aren't enough coming through and being senior partners. So my question to Paul is, why wouldn't you be a senior partner at your firm? There needs to be more black ethnic minority senior partners. Just because that sounds very strange coming from me. I appreciate that. But the people in law look like me. They hire people like me. You need to show students coming through. I work with the legal launchpad guys on occasion. You need to show these people that they can do what you can do.
So, Paul, will there be senior partners of major firms in the near future who are from a minority background?
No, I think undoubtedly. I think the point I was trying to make earlier is in some of these large firms, and indeed you've heard people from them, is that the titular role of senior partners means actually that they have less influence in doing things, I think, that sort of opening up the profession to black and ethnic minorities. I think you tend to get involved as a senior partner of some of the large firms you've been seeing, pretty much cutting ribbons, and people know what I mean. I don't mean physically, but attending committee after committee after committee. At the moment, anybody in this room, if you want to come and have a word with me, if you want to get an interview, you can come and I will break the rules. It'd be difficult to do that as a senior partner. And indeed, there are many people in this room who will know that we are there to show you how to get there. I have to spend a lot of my time encouraging people, A, to apply, because of course the worst places that encourage people are indeed the universities. They will try and direct you somewhere else. They'll try and direct you towards a master's program. They'll try and direct you to go back home if you've come in as an overseas student. But of course, people like me are sort of renegades because we hated listening to careers advisory people who would say that. We hated hearing people who would say, well, you would need a work permit, which is complete nonsense, because they can get them. Going back 18 years when I applied for a training contract, I had 100 applications, of which 94 were rejects. About 20 of which said, oh, well, we can't get your work permit. Well, the firms that did offer me jobs offered to get the work permits. So, I still have the Bible, as I call it, of rejection. So I think it's important that more people are encouraged to apply, more people are encouraged to break rules, don't listen to what people say, well, you can't get in, there are none in the city, they are here, look around the table. So I think it's important that people get in as partners. You have Shagun there, who can do much more than a senior partner at BLD. It may be good visibly, but I think there is a lot more influence that partners can play, like Trevor played, and he will continue to play following his managing partnership at Morrison & Foister. So we need more. Come and see us. Don't follow rules. Don't listen to people. Just come. You want a placement? I'll give it to you after this. And that is serious. I've spent sort of the last 2 hours just before I came here convincing a niece of mine, a perfectly a bright girl with a first class from London School of Economics. She had made 3 applications for a training contract. And she's completely depressed because she's got 3 rejections. She should have been applying to more. But to try and lift her out of that is a problem. So, I think we need more partners, but they will be. The head of Denton's office in Paris is an African. They're there. Come and see them. Disturb them. Some may be busy, but they'll see you. And I meant what I said.
If I can pass a bit of news on to your niece, the first 100 rejections are the most difficult. Yeah. Can I just bring Thomas in on this? Thomas, international institutions, the World Bank, the IMF, what are they doing? What part are they playing in this?
Okay. Well, at the IMF, we're obliged to hire internationally. Our articles, our treaty requires us to do so. But frankly, we haven't been that successful. I was hiring for 3 jobs recently in the legal department, and we had 500 applicants, and very few were coming from diverse candidates. And so it's clear that we're not doing a very good job in reaching the ethnic minority candidates. That's something that we're looking to, and perhaps people here in this room will have some ideas for how we do that. One thing that does strike me, though, is that there were ethnic minority candidates who I could not tell they were ethnic minority candidates from their resume, from their CV. And it's a great pity because for someone like me, I'm looking for difference. I see many candidates who look the same. I'm looking for people with different experiences and people who can add some additional value. And so I think it's important, again, to my earlier point, we need to celebrate our differences. We need to be positive about it, and I think that would also be useful. The other thing I would suggest is that we need to always try to be at our best. I've traveled all around the world representing the IMF, and I'm used to turning up in a room and people look behind me and around me and say, well, where's the IMF lawyer? And so I arrive well prepared. I know I need to be at my best every time. And so I encourage that in all of you. I mean, we have some barriers that we are aware of, and so it's important if we want to overcome those barriers that we really do our best to perform. So that's my final thought.
One of my first ever magistrates' court cases at Camberwell Green, they called my client's name, so I stood up to tell the usher I was the legal representative. Because the magistrate was just coming in, the usher rushed me into the dock, while my client looked flabbergasted and stayed outside. Now, I think Anesta has some experience about the Commonwealth
Secretariat, that's a really good reason not to do criminal work. There are too many criminal lawyers. You must do commercial and civil because you can do it. And come outside the box because there are masses of issues outside of the UK that involves land. People steal each other's land and they steal money out of bank accounts. So you can get involved in the tracing of assets and some really interesting pieces of law. The Commonwealth throws up a huge amount of interesting non-criminal work. I sat as a judge on the Commonwealth Secretariat for about 6 years, dealing with issues that relate to the Commonwealth Secretariat in London. So I got a huge view and picture of issues that are thrown up from the ex-Commonwealth countries, or rather the ex-colonial countries who are now Commonwealth countries. And I think it's really important to look outside the box and go to those countries, get involved. You can click on to the Commonwealth Secretariat website. They do lots of project work that does potentially include that you travel. And you travel to deal with different projects that, as I've said, have nothing to do with crime, but everything to do with interest in civil commercial transactions. Project work that requires you to deal with the rights of individuals in other countries, along with international law and how it interfaces with UK law. So I think that's just a specific suggestion, in my experience, where a lot of really young, new blood is required. And I think you should get yourself in front of the Privy Council. Nothing looks more impressive on your CV than the Privy Council. That's why I got Silk, so I'm sharing some of the expertise. Go do a pro bono Privy Council case. It's the best court in the world.
One or two very quick, short questions. I'm not sure if you can throw the mic from there.
3, 4 hands up.
Yeah, they're coming up now.
Okay. I'll come.
Remember, very
Could it be short? Short and sweet. And could I also ask the panel members to give me short and sweet?
Okay, I'm Chukwu Demez. I'm actually qualifying at the Nigerian bar at the moment. I think that a lot of the advice that has been given out tonight is really for people who have actually qualified. And I think the biggest problem that a lot of people face is actually getting access to the profession in the first place. For those of you who've done the BBC or who are at the bar, there are only about 386 pupilages this year, which means it's extremely prohibitive to get to the bar. Now, in order to be able to practice at the International Criminal Court, you have to have at least 7 years, I think, trial experience to be a trial attorney. I mean, that in itself is like a hurdle. So I wonder what advice the panel has for those who are intending to gain access to the profession and how that problem can be circumvented.
Can I just slightly widen the question to also include the problems that we are likely to have with the dip or the double dip in the recession as well? Yeah. So access to the profession, but doom and gloom for the future for solicitors?
Absolutely not. Thank God for the recession, certainly for people like me, because it suddenly created a huge rush of enthusiasm of lawyers from outside ethnic minorities suddenly wanting to be interested in these so-called emerging markets. So my door is banged every single day by, 60% of the partnership saying they now want to get involved in Africa. They now want to get involved in emerging markets. Shouldn't we consider getting involved in that rail project somewhere? And I think 15 years ago, it was very difficult. I've been at Denton's for 12 years now. And it was a struggle to get interest, which meant, we were talking about expertise earlier. It was a huge, great struggle. But now, doom and gloom, no. Africa is performing, emerging markets are performing. We talk about the BRIC countries, we talk about a lot of development. It's quite interesting that, going back to one of the characters who Courtenay mentioned, none other than Mr. Blair, I see him now more often. But guess where I see him? I see him in Rwanda. I see him as an advisor to the government. And you think, what's he hiding here for? And what is it? There's a full office there. So, there must be, our job is again to look at these opportunities that are out there. Don't give up. If you think if you can't get a job even in the profession in London, go abroad. I've just placed two trainees who couldn't qualify in our firm. I put them in Tanzania and the other one in Botswana. Go out, because I always say that actually the legal profession is much wider. And today, I would encourage anyone they'll get as good as careers they can get overseas. And when I say overseas, I'm saying in a lot of the countries that are so-called underdeveloped. And they get better training, better skills, and I'm pleased to say there are probably half a dozen projects that I'm working on now where we are subcontracted by local African firms. And so that's a change that's occurring now.
Anesta?
Yeah, just a couple of thoughts. I work at an institution that is extremely busy at the moment. On the international financial scene, We really are in demand of high caliber lawyers. And one of the things that I constantly note is that the world economy is radically changing. Countries like the US, the UK, and Europe are in relative decline. That's our own projection at the IMF. The areas of growth are in Asia. The areas of growth are in Africa. And so this is the future. And so for those of us who are interested and have a connection with those areas of the world, I think this is a really good time for us. I think we need to, as Anesta said, think outside the box. And that box, fortunately for us, encompasses areas of growth that we have a historical and a cultural connection to. So I know these are tough times when you are applying for a job domestically. It is hard. But I think if we can think a little bit more broadly about the international realm and how we can use our connection to that, I think that there's a lot of hope.
Can I just make one point? Because operating at that level is one thing. Coming out of university or law school with the daunting prospect of trying to find a training contract or pupillage is a different thing altogether. And the single point that I want to make is this. Confidence. Paul was talking earlier about his niece. Makes 3 applications, and then Paul has to spend time building up that confidence that she can achieve. We start with a disadvantage. The public school educated Oxbridge graduates have that confidence bred into them. And as a result, when I encountered them at the English Court School of Law, initially at least, it seemed quite daunting. But I soon came to realize that I had the same ability, and that so long as I was confident enough to display those skills, I could equally achieve. And so that's what I would like to drum into every young aspiring lawyer. Believe in yourself. Believe that you can achieve it. Yes, you might have to wait for a couple of years to get that pupillage, but if you knock on enough doors, it will come. And you need also to think laterally in terms of how you're going to achieve that. Don't think about the normal route. Be imaginative. But above all else, be confident in your ability that you can do it just like anybody else.
I cannot endorse as strongly as I want to the contributions made by our commercial partners on this panel. Doing anything in the UK is not a good time. Really, get on a plane. It's much more productive outside of the UK. And then you can watch from the outside and wait until the doom and depression slightly lifts, and then you come back with some expertise. Now, you may think I'm stretching this too high, but there are jobs which are available where you do not have to find a penny. You are paid for because you are young and bright, and they need you. But you've just got to look completely outside the box. I have persuaded 2 very bright pupils who couldn't get a pupillage. One had a double first, and the other had a 2-1. They are now outside of the UK doing law. They're not qualified, but it doesn't matter. They will be. They will come back with relevant expertise. It's another way around it. Just a suggestion.
Debo, do you have any more time?
Well, I was just going to say something. Actually, it's fantastic advice. But I coined the phrase, which I'm going to bang about because it could be, I was telling Sailesh this could be my claim to fame, 50 minutes claim to fame. The CIA. Is this the future for us? CIA, China, mighty China, incredible India, Africa next. So CIA, is that really, I think somebody's made the point already, is that really the IMF? I think Thomas said that is the future where the money is, CIA. Do you agree with that? Yes, he said.
Absolutely.
Courtenay, yes or no? CIA in charge in the future?
Well, yes, those economies will regain their natural ascendancy, which was distorted as a result of 19th and earlier century colonialism. And the natural order is just being restored. That's all that's happening. And so consequently, places like India and China, of course, will achieve some ascendancy.
And Africa.
I think CIA may take hold. When I was a student, I found employment with a furniture store. And my grandmother was so pleased in India that she told everyone that I worked for MI5. It was many years before she realized it was MFI. Now, I think that's all we probably have time for. Can I, on behalf of everyone, say to Paul, Anesta, Thomas, and Courtenay, you have raised the bar very, very high. And you have done us proud, and we are proud of you. Thank you very much for coming this evening.